Rosie. One on one.
Okay, I read an amazing book, An Unquenchable Thirst, and this is the book, and Mary Johnson is the author, and she's right here. This is an autobiography following Mother Teresa in search of love, service, and an authentic life. I so wanted to meet you.
Oh, Rosie, I'm so excited to be here.
I really couldn't believe what you have lived through and experienced. It's absolutely fascinating. You were in school, you saw Mother Teresa on the cover of Time magazine, and you felt a calling.
I was 17 years old, walking down the hall in front of the library, and I saw her picture on the cover of Time magazine. I'd never heard of Mother Teresa before. I went into the library, I skipped my French class, I read this article that talked about how this woman was going out into the streets of Calcutta, taking the dying off the streets, caring for babies that she found in dustbins. And as I read it, it was kind of like this fire burning inside of me. And somehow in that moment, I knew that I was meant to follow this woman and to do that same sort of work she was doing. I felt like it was a call to me.
You know, when people have said that in terms of their dedication to a spiritual path, the calling, I never really got what it meant. Like, did you hear a voice? Was it, you said it was like a fire? Had you ever felt that feeling in any way before?
It's an interesting question. I don't think I've ever felt it exactly like that before or since. It was just that kind of conviction, this total conviction that this is what I was meant to do. And I think, you know, I was a senior in high school. I was open. I was looking. I was searching for what I should do with my life.
Were you about to go to college?
I knew that I would go to college. I was a really good student. You know, I graduated top of my class. I think I was third, and they voted me most likely to succeed. I had edited the school newspaper.
So you had friends, you had a social life?
I did. I probably didn't have, you know, a really, really active social life in the sense that moved from Michigan to Texas when I was 12, and I don't know, it was hard for me. I never quite fit in Texas somehow. But I did have a lot of friends. I was really active. But when I read that article and saw Mother Teresa, it was this fire. It was like an electromagnet somehow. I just felt pulled. I felt called. And I think I had that kind of conviction that only a teenager is capable of having,
yes,
where you know that this is right and that nobody can tell you otherwise.
Right.
About a week after I read the article, I wrote my first letter saying that I wanted to become a nun, but I didn't have an address. I wrote Mother Teresa, Calcutta, India. And, you know, I wrote several letters like that never got responses. I read everything I could find about the Missionaries of Charity. I talked to my parish priest about what it would be like. He helped me try to get a little better address. Finally, eventually, the sisters wrote back to me, told me I could come to New York, to the South Bronx, to spend a week with them. I did that. And then after that, I decided, yes, I really did want to join them.
What did your family think of it?
My family is a very religious family, and my mother, I remember she said, if you want to become a nun, you can. You know, she had wanted to become a nun when she was young, and her mother had absolutely put her foot down and said, there's no possible way. But my mother said, you have to wait. You're not old enough to make this kind of decision yet, and you need to finish your education first. And after you graduate from college, if this is what you want to do, fine. But like I said, you know, nobody could really tell me otherwise. I knew what I had to do. And when I finally got that letter back, it was only a few months after that, you know, I joined the sisters.
It's really telling about what it was like for you to give up all your worldly possessions and commit to a life of poverty. I think you can't really imagine until you read the book. There's a story about when Mother Teresa came and she saw the curtains in the window.
I was in Washington by this time. I'd been with the sisters about 5 years. And Mother Teresa had been there for the initial opening of the house in Washington. And then she came back after a year to visit us. And one of the first things she noticed when she walked in was that we had these curtains in the refectory. And Mother Teresa said, why are those curtains so long? And our superior had told me that we needed to have these extra long curtains, and I had never understood it myself. But Mother Teresa said we must have only covering half of the window, and they must be just pure white, simple cloth. And she was very upset about the curtains. And my superior, when she found this out, she told me not to take the curtains down now because it was Sunday and we couldn't fix them, and because on Sunday we never sewed. And then I got in a lot of trouble because I hadn't taken down the curtains because Mother Teresa had wanted that. And it was that moment that she told me she knew what was wrong with me. And she kind of looked into my eyes and she said, "You like to be consulted. You must allow Jesus to use you without consulting you." And I kind of took a deep breath. I said, "Yes, Mother. Thank you, Mother."
Well, that's a pretty trippy thing to hear from the woman who is, to you, closest to Jesus, right?
Absolutely. And she was the one who really laid out the way of life that we were following. She was the one that we all believed spoke God's message to us. And I knew that in a certain sense it was true, that I thought I had something to offer. And Mother Teresa was always very clear that it wasn't coming from below that, you know, the wisdom would come, but always from above, whatever the superiors would say.
When she died, there was a lot made of the fact that they found her journals and that she struggled with her own faith.
I think most people had expected that Mother Teresa never wavered in her faith, because I think that was the image that she portrayed, and she was very conscious of portraying that image. In those journals, she writes about the fact that she felt like she lived behind a mask, that inside her soul was in torment, but outside, torment, torture, those were the words that she used. Outside, she had to project this image of peace, of serenity, of cheerfulness. And she always told us that we must always be cheerful. No matter what we felt, we should always, you know, even among ourselves, never show any sign of any trouble that we were having, any doubts, which made it hard to have real relationships with people. But I think people were especially shocked when it came out that Mother Teresa had doubts, because for so many people, they had put her on this pedestal where she was perfect. And
Do you think you put her there too?
I think in the beginning I did. And then I realized she's a human being like all the rest of us, you know, and you live with somebody day to day, you realize that pretty quickly.
You shared a room with her various points throughout.
At various points. I traveled alone with Mother sometimes. Once in Sweden, I was her traveling companion, and we shared a room in the home of a Lutheran pastor, which was really interesting because Mother had been invited for an ecumenical gathering, all these different religions. And they didn't have a convent in that town, and so they put us in the home of the Lutheran pastor. And we arrived there in the middle of the night, and Mother Teresa started readjusting the furniture in the bedroom. I said, "Mother, what are you doing?" And she said, "We must have an altar." And she moved a nightstand into one corner of the room, and she took from her bag this little statue of Mary, one of those plastic glow-in-the-dark statues. And she put it on this nightstand, and she said, "This is our altar." And we knelt down there on this shag rug in that room between the two beds, and we prayed before this statue that she'd pulled from her bag.
Did you like her?
Did I like her? I admired her. I always wanted to get to know her a little better, because she always presented that face, even to us, of someone, you know, who was in authority, who couldn't let herself always be herself.
Right.
And you had that sense when you were with her that things were going on underneath that she felt she had to hide. And so that it was hard to get to know her that way.
Don't go away. More with Mary after the break. The second part of the book, I would say the second half, reads like a Jackie Collins novel. There's so much sex going on in that convent Sisters of Charity whole thing. First, you had a relationship with one of the other, not postulates, what would you call them? Sisters, I guess?
Sister,
one of the other, and no one ever really found out? Or how did that ever, was that ever exposed, or were you the one to tell it here?
I tell about this relationship here, and in fact, while Mother Teresa was alive, I told her about it, because it came out eventually. I discovered that this sister was not just someone to whom I happened to be attracted, and we developed a relationship, but she had all along, kind of from the very beginning, found ways to draw sisters into relationships and then never let them go. She became very, very manipulative. And eventually something happened that I never thought would happen. And I was responsible for preparing this sister. Her name was Sister Niobe, responsible for preparing her for her final vows. And I realized, you know, of course, that she was not ready to take her final vows. And I tried to help her in various ways. I tried to get other people to help her. And eventually I told Mother Teresa, because it was very clear to me that she was incapable of living a vow of chastity. And basically, Mother Teresa said that it was a greater sin for us to talk about that, to mention it, than anything that had actually happened. And she allowed...
That is sadly a lot of what the Catholic Church is guilty of doing for centuries.
Over and over and over again. And I think what happens is that you have these people who are living lives of celibacy, who have attitudes towards sex and sexuality that are completely in their heads because they have never had a chance for it to be anywhere else. And they don't know what they're talking about very often. They don't know how a person is affected when they're violated sexually. They don't understand what it is to, you know, have just a normal relationship between people sometimes.
Or how beautiful and intimate and spiritual a physical connection of sexuality can be with another person there's something quite godly about that experience. And I think celibacy in the Catholic Church is doing a lot of damage to the institution.
I agree. You know, eventually I have a relationship with a priest in the book, and we fantasize sometimes about getting married. He was a wonderful person. He still is. He's a marvelous person.
And you were sort of the aggressor. You went over and kissed him outside in public. I was like, Mary, you go, girl. But you felt all these feelings for him, and you just took the risk.
I took a risk. I did. I kissed him. You know, the first time it wasn't in public. You know, eventually, I think the only public kiss happened in a hospital with one other person present when he just gave me a little peck on the cheek. But part of the problem for me was that any relationship you had like that, you had to keep silent. You had to keep quiet. You had to hide it. And you can't have a healthy relationship like that. I mean, it's impossible because you're always, you know, living this sort of double reality.
Lie, yes. And you disguised him in the book, Father Tom, as you call him. But you sent him the book, and he only read the first few chapters and said he doesn't want to read anymore, correct?
He read the first draft.
Oh, the whole draft, okay.
He read the parts that he was in, basically, because I had sent him those parts several years before the book was published. And, you know, he never told me not to do it. I think he understands why I have to tell this story. But he, as far as I know, hasn't read the entire book, has no intention of reading the entire book. You know, it's difficult for him. It's painful for him in many different respects.
I can understand. More with Mary after the break. When did you decide to leave and why?
The decision took a while. I was a nun for 20 years. For about the last 5 or 6, I'd say, things got really very difficult for me, progressively more and more difficult. I wasn't given that sort of work with the poor that I'd signed on for. I got a lot of office work, a lot of work helping with the sisters, which was rewarding in its own way, but I longed for that work directly with the poor. I realized that I needed closer, intimate relationships than the rules allowed, and that I didn't want to live a double life. And so the last year that I was there, I made this promise to God. I said, I'm going now for this year, one entire year, to keep all the rules as best I can. I am not going to make any exceptions for myself. And if at the end of the year I find that I can be myself as a missionary of charity, I will stay and I'll never again question. But if at the end of the year I see that really I can't be myself in this group, I'll go. And at the end of the year, it just became really clear to me. I couldn't be myself. I felt completely suffocated, and I needed to go.
You're happy now?
I am.
You're not a religious person?
I'm not a religious person. I don't go to church. I'm a very happily married woman. I like yoga. I like gardening. I ride my bike a lot. And I think a lot about these questions that are still there, that many people frame as religious questions, but I think they're very human questions.
Like?
Like purpose in life, like meaning, like where do you find the way to go forward? Because for me, that was always before in God. And it was like, you know, eventually one day we're all going to die and we'll go to heaven. And I said, No, we have to live the life we have here, now, in this place. And that becomes very, very important for me. And questions about how to do that well, without all the trappings of religion, to live mindfully, I think it's really important.
I do too. It's really a beautiful book. It is. There's some parts of it that, you know, really, when people are ill and they're sick and you're asking for help and you're told pray for them. I don't know. There was a lot of abuse. I felt like when you read this and you're not in the group, there's a lot of abusive behavior that happens, and I don't know. An Unquenchable Thirst is the book. It's available in bookstores now or on your Kindle or whatever you use. Thank you very much. We'll be back with Nell Casey after the break.